pull list has been steadily reverting from big two to indie, honestly. Like, and every time I drop a big two title, I always try to replace it with an indie. Like, I've said this like the last week or so. I'm probably going to be dropping almost all my X books in place of independent titles, just because, like, who wants a 22-part crossover? Not me.
Yeah.
I don't care how good it is, you know?
Yeah, no. There's something to be said about something that's, a short, concise story. I mean, and nowadays, when I say short, I mean, look, I'll settle for just 4 to 6 issues. But I mean, this 12 issues or comments like Tom King, it's, lots of stories are 100 issues long. No, actually, that's abnormal, and that should be abnormal. And, and bloody well, if I think an idiot, a monkey should be able to write a coherent story in 100 issues. It's amazing how many monkeys aren't capable of doing that who still work in the industry, but that's...
Well, I would say that it's difficult to tell a good story in 100 issues just because that's a lot of content and it takes a lot of planning, and to be fair, I'll say this, that like the publishing schedule of comic books is so unreasonable. It makes it really, really hard for decent writers to be good, and it makes it really hard for great writers to stay great. You know what I'm saying? It's unreasonable. That's why I adore the way TKO Presents has been doing their things, like with Sentient and Sarah and things like that, where you can just buy either the oversized trade or these really premium quality 6 issues in a display box. I'll pay that premium, man. I'm more than happy to pay a premium to not only not rush these creators, but to get good creative teams to take their time, get a better product to display on my shelf, and arguably just a more digestible story. That's just me.
Yeah.
Which, if you haven't checked them out, Boom, I highly recommend you pick up some of their stuff.
To be honest with you, I actually tried ordering Sentient about 6 months ago. It was a long time ago, and but my retailer said for whatever reason he couldn't get it. He tried and he called and he couldn't get it, and now I'm going to talk to him again because I love packaging. Really good packaged comics, like even the Earth 1 series.
Mm-hmm.
I have them all on display. I have a nice shelf in my living room, and I got all the absolutes and a nicely shelved and packaged comic book. I'll put it on the shelf. I won't put it in storage, and that's something that I think that the big two have to start thinking more and more about, because I think the indie market is already ahead of them. Certainly, Kickstarter and the Indiegogo are way ahead of them. There you go, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, aside from that, I think like European comics have taken like the idea of comic books from Americans and 100% improved upon it. You're seeing a much better market over there. When you came down to New York Comic Con, I mean, you were talking about the numbers and how much better European comics do than American comics. I mean, hell, manga does infinitely better than American comics does. It's kind of sad that the best comic we've had in like a year. I mean, and 300,000 copies for 3 Jokers is nothing to scoff at. But like the fact that that's like the best thing we've seen in a year, and the only other thing to topple it was, Detective 1000, which quality wise wasn't anywhere nearly as good as the first issue of 3 Jokers. Spoilers, by the way, for those of you who haven't seen my review or Comic Boom's review. But with that, let's get into some of these live chats and then intro up the show. We have Tehilin29 saying, good to see you all. It's good to see you too, man.
Good to see you, Tehilin.
Aaron VO, the one and only, saying, hey, happy Friday. Happy Friday to you, my brother. Mark McKeever, getting evil tonight. Hi, y'all. What's going on, Mark? Thanks for popping in. John Thomas, what's good, peeps? Not much, man. Getting ready to talk some comics, honestly. This was a really, we were actually throwing shit at the wall in order to come up with a stream for tonight, but we figured why the hell not. It's a couple days before my semester starts. I'm gonna be getting pretty busy. Wanted to get something out there, talk to the good people, the good members of the Dark Knight Nation. And what would we call your fan base or your viewer base? The comic boomers? Would that be it?
I guess I've never really called them anything. Comic boomers or the boomerang gang. I don't know. Boomerangs. I don't know. I've never actually. What do you call yours? The Dark Knight Nation, or what do you?
Yeah, I figured it's easy enough. I call them the Dark Knight Nation.
Oh, yeah.
We are all a part of the Dark Knight Nation, baby.
Sure.
Nevertheless, let's see. Aaron Vio saying, DK, I love the green screen, dude. Nice change of scenery. Thanks, man. I figured it definitely beats like this random corner in the room that I'm moving into with a bunch of random shit, and I might as well promote my own comic book. Which, by the way, if any of you beautiful people joining us live or joining us in post weren't aware, I am starting a Kickstarter for my own independent comic book on September 1st called Area 51, The Helix Project. It is a sci-fi noir story that takes you deep into a government conspiracy to create super soldiers out of mutating alien skin grafting, and it gets super nuts. It is super emotional, has a lot of very relevant themes to today about moderacy, allowing yourself to grow, depression, things of that nature. So as much as we're trying to take this one to the sky and deep into the recesses of the most hush government facilities, this story is ultimately a lot about people. So if that interests you, please make sure you subscribe to the channel down below, as we will be coming out with a full-on announcement / promotional video for this project. It is something I'm super proud of. We've been getting pages back every day, and they are absolutely spectacular, if I can say so myself. So make sure you guys stick around for Area 51, the Helix Project. Let's see. Mark McKeever says, DC's metal until January 21st. Give me a break. I gave myself a break, but I don't buy that book. I just don't care anymore. I don't know. I know Boom is usually, he's usually more of the type to still buy books after he doesn't like the series up until that point. I don't know, Boom. Are you going to be giving metal a chance up until, well, he's gone. And here we are. We're a thing. Well, yeah, like I said, I've already given Death Metal a break. I'm not buying it. I've never picked up the Death Metal series. And on that, I don't ever plan to. I only really read review copies that I had gotten through press. So there's that. Sorry for my now kind of shaky background. It definitely relies upon my screen not being wide. So here we are. But yeah, I think a couple of people are getting into a little bit more about iconic villains here in the live chat. So we will definitely be getting into that in just a moment. I guess while we're waiting for Boom, I'll also give another quick plug to you guys. My Batman 3 Jokers review is live. I am actually hosting a giveaway so that I can give one of the viewers a free physical copy of this book, as well as a poster of the issue 1 cover and this super snazzy Batman Joker playing card. So if you want to get this highly sought after book, make sure you go check that out. I put a lot of work into this review, and I'm fairly proud of it. So if you would, please make sure you check that out using the link below. And of course, if you've seen it already, sharing it with friends on any of your social media and things of that nature is a huge help. And if you want to tag me in any of socials, you can find me pretty much everywhere at Dark Knight Nation. So go ahead, give that a shot if you haven't already, because I think it's a pretty okay review, if I say myself. And otherwise, if you want to support the channel and get a little bit back for yourself, check out the Dark Knight Nation merch shop down below. If you are a fan specifically of this show, Let's Talk Comics, we just put up an embroidered shirt up there. It's super high quality, very soft, and the embroidery is super fine-tuned, as well as a Let's Talk Comics coffee mug. And for those of you that have joined us for those very casual comics and coffee community chats, I have made a long overdue comics and coffee mug. So go check that out down below if you haven't already. And with that being said, I guess I will intro us in as we wait for my companion here. So, hey guys, welcome to the 57th episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and another co-host in the comics community discusses one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics. Whether it be stories, creators, constructs, or adaptations, we hit it all. This week, of course, I'm joined by my partner in crime, the Canadian Cape Crusader himself, Comic Boom, who we are actively waiting to rejoin us on this call. So whenever that happens, you'll see it as soon as I do. And with that being said, I want to thank everybody who's joining us live and those of you who are watching us in post later for being a part of this community. So if you end up enjoying this conversation, if this type of conversation tickles your fancy, make sure to leave a like on the video down below. It is an absolutely huge help. And with that out of the way, I think it's time to get into this topic. So as you can clearly tell, we're going to be talking about kind of the iconic villains checklist. What makes a villain iconic? And I think that there are multiple ways to kind of define an iconic villain. Oop, there he is. Welcome back, friend.
Sorry, man. I have to still working on my internet problems here in the loft, so
it's all good, man. It's all good. I actually just finished introing us up. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen of the court, my cohort in crime, the Canadian Cape Crusader himself, Comic Boom, my brother. I know it is impromptu, but it is good as always to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to talk about bad guys. That's good. You know, enough about good guys. You know, let's get bad. Let's get dark. Let's get dark, my friend.
Let's get Zack Snyder grim dark, baby.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about here, and by that I mean not really, but yeah. So there is this central question: what makes a villain iconic? And I think that to many different people, there's going to be a number of different traits that qualify a villain as iconic. And you'll see in the thumbnail there are a couple villains that I think are particularly iconic just over their longevity and sort of the eyes that are put on them nowadays and the platform they've been given. And to me, one of the things that I think makes a comic book villain or a villain in general really absolutely iconic is their ability to identify. There he is. DC's Dark God himself, Darkseid. One of the things that I think makes a villain really iconic and really effective is their ability to identify one of the core wounds of the protagonist of our hero and open that motherfucker right the hell up. And I think that's one of the reasons why characters like the Joker can be so impactful in stories. And it's one of the reasons, honestly, why I think the Three Jokers is so good, because one of the things he does is take a look at each one of the protagonists' core wounds and literally open it right up. And it creates a lot of really great emotional drama for these characters. It creates a lot of narrative drama in terms of what we're doing with plot. Are they able to overcome this task being broken down by their villain to such a high degree? But at the end of the day, I think many of the most iconic villains have such an awareness of the hero that they're facing, and they know how to take them down a peg. And again, one of those things is opening up their core wounds. What do you think about that, Boom? Do you think an iconic villain has to be able to identify their hero's core wound? Do you think it's important?
Well, it's what some villains do. I think it's important. It's very entertaining when that happens. It makes for compelling storytelling. There's that old expression that a hero is only as good as his villain, right? And so in many ways, one could perhaps come up with an argument that Batman would not be as interesting a character but for the Joker. I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, the Joker movie, the Batman movie coming out for the first time. Well, almost the first time we don't have Joker in it. I mean, it's Joker is such a compelling villain, and a villain that can really get into a hero's head is definitely one that's intriguing. I find that what's interesting about when a villain takes that approach, that's one of the reasons why villains are often more interesting than the heroes, at least sometimes in the movies, and not just in comic books, but in any story. There's something about villains. Let's face it, as human beings, we're just attracted to darkness, and there's an expression, and Marianne Williamson, who tried to run for the Democratic Party, she's written a lot of books, and one of her most famous quotes, and I know she talks about love a lot, but she has this expression, and I'm going to paraphrase it. She says, "It's not our darkness that we are afraid of; it's our light." And that's one thing I've always found interesting about villains is that it's easy to be. Everybody loves the darkness. Everybody loves the villains, but You know, often it's the most difficult thing to do is to be the nice guy. But the thing is about being the nice guy is usually boring. You know, taking the right path often means that you're not creating drama, that you're not making enemies, you're not getting down and dirty. And there's something about getting down and dirty that as human beings, we're attracted to bad guys, you know? And so that's why we want good guys to have really, really opposites, you know? I don't know. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think you make a lot of sense here, man. And when it comes to villains, I think John Thomas also kind of makes a statement here that is along the lines of what we're saying. And he says that an iconic villain, in his opinion, is one who truly challenges the hero like no one else can. They also create moments to where the hero is driven to the brink and possibly broken. And I think that kind of curtails into my discussion of identifying and reopening the core wound, or one of the core wounds of the hero, is because, well, they're breaking down a character in a way almost no one else can, in a very deep way, right? I think most heroes, in many tropes, are able to overcome a huge physical dilemma, whether or not the villain is just bigger or badder than they are, or just better than they are at what they do, or if, you know, the odds physically seem too overwhelming. You know, the hero always gets back up after that. But there's those emotional scars and those mental scars that are not so easy to come back from. It's not as simple as nursing a broken leg. So I think that, you know, between what you're saying, Boom, and what John is saying here, you know, the best villain is able to challenge their hero on multiple different levels, whether it is the physical side of it, whether it's the sort of mental capacity to outsmart them, or just emotionally tearing them down. And I think that's super important. Although I think there are many solid villains that don't necessarily do that, that may in ways sort of mirror aspects of a hero's core wound without explicitly prodding at it. And you see characters like Captain Cold, right, from The Flash. He's not super devious, but he is this interesting mirror image of Barry Allen in a way where Barry is, I would say, in ways more than Superman, is kind of a Boy Scout, right? Like, he just does everything right. He has a process. Snart is very much just go with the flow. You know, if I feel like robbing a bank, we're robbing a bank. If I feel like doing this, we're doing that. And in other ways, he is tactical like Barry. But there is this interesting sort of contradiction between those two characters where, you know, Leonard Snart isn't really gonna poke at Barry losing his mom, or, you know, poke at Barry's dad being in jail, but, you know, he's gonna do things that just bother Barry in a kind of unintentional way.
Yeah. Uh, that's it. That's one. He's almost like the everyday villain. Leonard Snart is someone who almost seems to have his own code, and he never strikes me as someone that would ever kill the Flash, although he at times has perhaps tried to do so. I think the one thing about the Flash rogues is that they just want to get away with it. They're almost bad guys for the fun of it, and I don't even think that they view themselves. I think they view themselves more like Robin Hoods than anything else. It's funny. I've always thought of the Flash's rogues gallery. I don't really think of them always as true villains, even though I know they are villains. I know they're bad guys. They commit crime, but they always seem to have a kind of a cool code of conduct that I've always put them in sort of a different category. As you were talking there, I want to draw a distinction between the Trinity's villains, because I think it might help elevate our discussion a bit. Batman, you mentioned that you made a good point about Batman and the Joker, how the Joker gets into Batman's head. A lot of Batman's villains, they seem to take that approach to Batman. They get in Batman's head. Superman's villains just like to take him down. They want to take him down for the sake of defeating him. They want to claim the fame that they beat Superman. Lex Luthor wants to make Superman look like a fool, humiliate him, elevate humanity over superhumanity. And Wonder Woman's villains, strangely enough, are often criticized for being broken. Wonder Woman's villains, all of them are broken inside. It's not Wonder Woman who's broken. It's her villains who are broken. The Cheetah is possessed. She's broken. The Silver Swan, she's broken. They're mind controlled, and Wonder Woman is always trying to fix her villains. Even the new villain, Liar in this month's Wonder Woman, it's Maxwell Lord's daughter. Spoiler alert. who is probably is going to be in need of redemption. And so this idea that some villains just want to destroy the hero, others just like getting inside their head. And sometimes the villains are just broken people that are looking for something, and it's their way of making a statement is just attacking the hero.
You make an interesting point. Although I think the thing about Superman's villains is that I think they actually eat at him sort of emotionally, right? Like you look at Luthor, and I think you look at most of like Luthor's greatest plots against Superman, and he's taking advantage of Superman's heart, right? Superman's good nature, and in many ways, there are, I would say a much smaller amount of characters that can present a physical threat to Superman that are iconic as the ones that can kind of present an emotional threat. Because Superman's smart, he's not a moron, but he's also he's clearly also not going to process mental and emotional trauma in the way that Batman does, right? You look at issues like or stories like Batman Rest in Peace, right, where you find out he creates the Zur-En-Arrh persona as a mental coping mechanism to allow himself to kind of reboot himself, which I think is brilliant. Like, it's one of my favorite parts of Grant Morrison's Batman run, because although he's mentally and physically beaten down, he has a contingency even for that where he can compartmentalize. Superman very much can't do that. And it is, I would say, one of his greatest weaknesses. And that's why I think I'd give you a little bit of pushback there, is that I think that most of the best Superman stories are where people take advantage of his good heart rather than, his inability to win a physical fight.
Yeah, even in let's God forbid I mentioned Bendis. I got to sneak Bendis in there. In the latest issue of Action Comics, a newly introduced character, Melody Moore, who is running for political office. She's actually murdered, and she's killed by the Red Cloud just out of spite, to spite Superman. And it was actually, God, dare I say it, it wasn't that well drawn by John Romita Jr., but it was actually an emotional moment for Superman. And even through very bad art, you could see the impact that it had on Superman. And I think that plays in well with what you're saying, that, some villains, especially when it comes to Superman, they take advantage of his good heart. And that definitely was the case in this week's Action Comics.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on that because I got off the Bendis Action Comics and Superman train like 2 years ago. So I can't speak much on that, but that's again the thing about Superman is it's they're constantly they're constantly testing his sort of emotional capacity and whether or not he wants to be able to cross certain lines or not, right? Because he clearly has the ability to do anything he wants. And I would say that there's nothing physically outside of the realm of Superman's capabilities. It's whether or not Superman is willing to do something, and testing his willingness to do something over something else, is I think what makes it interesting. Wonder Woman, I think, is interesting because I would define her villains as more primal. I think they succumb more over to primal instincts, right? Like Cheetah is this essence of jealousy. Black Swan is like broken down, like you said, but I get a lot of depression and overcompensation. I mean, Ares is that primal urge to be aggressive, right? When any sort of conflict arises. So I think, and I'm not the world's biggest Wonder Woman fan, but based on what I've read, I think her villains kind of appeal to these very primal urges in humanity, which I think is interesting, is a really interesting way to sort of frame, this character that is comprised of strength and love and compassion in many ways, and who, in many ways has to appeal to her sort of higher brain function in order to again, like appeal to those senses of compassion and love. And there are these other characters that appeal to those sort of more negative primal urges to hate and to be angry and to want chaos over something, because chaos is easy and it's easy to let go versus kind of controlling yourself and having some sort of structure in many ways. And in many ways as well, I think the concept of Themyscira being untouchable to most people is very much a sign of kind of control and restraint, right? Like the Amazons were able to preserve themselves and create this incredibly functional society of women that are these incredible warriors and incredible minds, incredible hunters, so on and so forth, because they were able to preserve themselves from those primal urges in ways that man's world could not.
Yeah. And Wonder Woman is you have to distinguish the more you get into Wonder Woman lore, there's a distinction between the gods who are villains like Ares versus demigods and human beings that are villains. Like there's no question this is a well-established pattern with Wonder Woman that a great many of her human villains, they're all broken, like from Veronica Cale to Silver Swan to Cheetah. If you get into their origins, they're always in need of redemption. Liar Liar's another one. There's something missing inside them. They're broken in some way, and they look to Diana to preserve them. Even the four horsewomen of Apocalypse in Steve Orlando's run, all four of them, Devastation, War, Paula Von Gunter, who was the War Master. She was manipulated by Leviathan, and she was raised by Wonder Woman. Her parents were killed and by the Valkyrie, and Wonder Woman took her and didn't tell young War Master what her background was, but raised her lovingly. And then when young Paula Von Gunter found out the truth, she got angry at Wonder Woman and became War Master. And it's always about Wonder Woman's theme is always about forgiveness and compassion, and because it plays so well into Wonder Woman's magic lasso with truth and her nature, I think that's why those villains are often broken, because it gives it's a way to enhance one of Wonder Woman's heroic strengths, and that is her capacity to forgive and redeem through the magic lasso and through her nature and through her loving submission. And I think that's why you have more villains who have their flaws more on display in many ways in Wonder Woman comics. I actually don't like that. I wish Wonder Woman had more of a Joker. I really do. I think Wonder Woman needs more of a badass. Even Cersei, Wonder Woman's villain, she's forgiven Cersei. Like Cersei still has almost like a compassionate side, and it's just like, now Wonder Woman needs a Joker. I think that. I really wish that they would rock the boat a little bit and maybe move. Batman has the best rogues gallery because he's got characters that are both broken, flawed, different motivations. Batman has the best of the best rogues gallery out of all of them, with the possible exception of Spider-Man, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of approach. Oh wow, we're getting that audio crackle again. I'm gonna approach this in kind of twofold. One of which I think, just by stating that, I think what we're both saying about Wonder Woman's villains, I think, are very similar, because I think that acting on primal urges, right? Like the kind of how I'm defining Wonder Woman's villains, I think, are a product of being broken down. These characters, their ability to process and to think, I think, rationally, is what causes them to make primal decisions. So very much, I think that our sort of conceptions of how to define Wonder Woman's villains are very, very similar in that way. You know what I'm saying? Because in order to act on primal urges, most likely one is broken to the point where they feel no desire to think beyond sort of instincts and those very irrational bits of judgment. I'm trying to, what was the second half of what you'd said? I was definitely going to comment on that.
Second half of what I said. Well, I talked the difference between the different villains of the Trinity: Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They're broken in some way. They're gods, but
I do remember. So the thing about Batman's villains that I think are very multifaceted are that his greatest villains often represent very core flaws of humanity, of people, of the world we live in, as Batman is supposedly the best of us who fuels his crusade on crime with his trauma. He takes his core wound and sort of makes that pain his motivation to move forward. His villains, I think, reinforce that pain in this very oppressive way, and they are all various angles on the biggest shortcomings of humanity, right? I mean, you look at the Court of Owls and it's a sort of greed and this idea of classism and domineering in that way. The Joker is just untold, unbridled evil. Harvey is about the sort of dichotomy, right, of humanity, that ability to process and to do great good, right? To be Harvey Dent, the White Knight, so to speak, or to be Two-Face, to give in to the anger and the hate that we all carry within us, so on and so forth, right? Like you can say that for most of Batman's villains. And you know, if we want to get a Wonder Woman story with a defining arc with a great villain, DC, I work for cheap. I know you're hemorrhaging for money, but I have a great Wonder Woman Grail story up in my noggin. So I'm here for you. I know I've shit on you a little bit these last couple weeks, but
I got a Grail story too, man. Yeah, we at least let's collaborate. If they hire you, you can, you know, I want to sneak in some ideas.
Listen, I'm all for it. I'll give you a co-writing credit. I'm game as long as we can get as far as getting DC to hire us. I'm all for it. So I'm curious as well, for everybody watching. What do you guys think there are sort of blanket terms that can sort of sub-define any of the any of the DC Trinity's villains? Because I think in many ways, the DC Trinity are some of the most symbolic characters in comic books and therefore in fiction, and therefore I think that their villains also in many ways have to be symbolic and definable. So I'm curious for everybody watching, do you guys think there are ways to define either Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman's rogues galleries in the ways that Comic Boom and I are sort of attempting to do at the beginning of this conversation? With that, I want to get into a couple of these live chats a little bit. I think to avoid the audio crackle, we'll probably, should we like mute you while I'm talking and then go? Yeah, there we go. Because I think it's coming from your end there. That way we can sort of mitigate the amount of crackling that we hear. Let's see. Getting into some more live chats. Tevia Smolka says, also some villains like Norman Osborn have a great death. I don't quite know where we're getting at. So does a great villain have to have a great death? Is that what we're getting at here? Or does a villain need to die to be great in many ways, to be memorialized? Qualify that for me, man. I know he also, Tehillim brings up Eobard Thawne, which I think is an excellent villain who, like the Joker, is far oversaturated. He is my favorite Flash villain. He is a top 10 villain of all time for me. But like Joker, I think a lot of bad writers, Williamson, tend to lean on such great characters and oversaturate them. When it comes to Thawne, he very much, like the Joker, is great at identifying aspects of Barry Allen's core wounds and prying them open. I mean, that's what Flashpoint was all about. Even the first Eobard Thawne arc under Williamson's run, which I didn't think was very bad, was about Eobard Thawne taking his kind of self-centered nature and using that to eat at Barry's kind of Boy Scout nature, so to speak. I don't know. I mean, to me, Thawne is a fantastic villain that, like the Joker, is far overbig. I don't know. Boom. What is your general assessment of Eobard Thawne? All-time great villain, iconic even, and what do you think makes him great?
Well, I'm not a big fan of Eobard Thawne, to be honest with you. But I acknowledge that he's a great villain. Just because I don't like him, I don't like the Joker either, but he's a great villain. So, but no, Eobard Thawne, he is, and maybe I'm going to get him confused because there's been a number of Reverse Flashes, and I always sometimes confuse Professor Zoom with Airport Dawn or whatever. But but usually, didn't he start off with a friendship, or like it's like he stalks Barry Allen. He's from the future, isn't he? Airport Dawn, right? And he's obsessed with him, and there's something that, to me, that's almost a different subcategory of villain, the one that is obsessed with the hero, and then you become obsessed with a hero, and then you learn so much about him, and then you try to find a way to hurt them, or you want to become their friend, and then they reject you, and then you want to punish them, because that's kind of what Eobard Thawne did originally, didn't he? Like, he was rejected by the Flash because he was too mentally ill or something. And I don't, maybe it's because I deal with restraining orders all the time, but I'm not a big fan of people that stalk other people. So I don't find, I personally, that's why I've never really been a fan of Eobard Thawne, but I fully acknowledge that there's some great Reverse Flash Eobard Thawne stories. And, I like it when it gets into Barry's head. And I just find, unfortunately, with Eobard Thawne, I just find that I don't know. I just find that it becomes a trope too often. And as you sort of alluded to, it became a trope under Williamson. And, which is just a quick note. My favorite interplay of villain versus hero was Mark Waid's Irredeemable and Incorruptible. He wrote a series called Irredeemable about a superhero turned villain, and about his arch enemy who was a supervillain who became a superhero. And they're both the series were like 30-some issues long alongside each other. Incorruptible and one series was called Incorruptible, and the other series was called Irredeemable. And it was an amazing character arcs for the supervillain. How did the villain become the hero, and how did the villain turn into the hero? And it's basically like a Superman Lex Luthor scenario, and it's just wonderfully done. And I would recommend it to anybody, if they get a hold of those trade paperbacks, to check those out.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, man, you heard it here. Definitely, you guys go check that out if you want a great villain story, especially like a villain redemption, which I find is interesting, because that is, I think, if pulled off correctly, can very much make a villain's journey very iconic. A couple months ago we had a great stream talking about the hero's journey. I'd love to talk a little bit about the villain's journey one day. I think that would be an interesting idea for a stream. But yeah, on that, I think you make some very good points there. I think Eobard Thawne is interesting because he's, in ways that the Joker is this twisted mirror image of Batman. I think Eobard is like that for Flash, is like that for Barry. He's very regimented and has this process about looking at the world, and it's not necessarily an element of absolutism, but Barry Allen does have a very pure way of looking at things, and in ways that Eobard Thawne's way of looking at things was easily corruptible by Barry disregarding him in a way. I guess I think in a way that Thawne found completely offensive and defining, and I think the way that Eobard Thawne responds to Barry not giving him the attention he deserved very much articulates a lot of the differences between those two characters, and what makes Eobard a really interesting mirror to Barry Allen. And Mark McKeever brings up, of course, Sinestro, right? Great rival for Hal Jordan, he says. Mark Strong's depiction in the Green Lantern movie was the only saving grace for that film. I agree with both sentiments there. I think Sinestro is an amazing villain, and I love that Sinestro, to me, is kind of a villain of necessity, or at least that's how Sinestro considers it. And I think he considers himself doing an ultimately greater good, and is sort of corrupted by those ambitions, becoming something far worse. One of the most iconic Sinestro scenes for me was at the end of the Jeff Johns run, and they're having that great fight, and they're gonna come in for that one last attack, and Hal Jordan goes, were we ever really friends? And Sinestro goes, that's the tragedy of it all, Jordan. We were the best of friends. And I was just like, oh my heart, right? Like, there is this desire for kinship between that pair, and yet Sinestro is so convicted to his greater good that he denies himself that kinship. And that's why I think in many ways Hal Jordan and Sinestro are these really interesting mirrors of one another, because I would say Sinestro is kind of like a like a this sort of extremist version of good, whereas Hal is this very sort of instinctual version of good. And man, when they clash, it is one for the ages, especially when done well. I think Sinestro again is. I was this close to putting Sinestro on the thumbnail, guys, but I had the green color scheme going with Joker, Loki, and Lex, so I had to stick with it for the sake of graphic design appeal, I suppose. But I don't know, boom, like what we don't really talk a hell of a lot about the Green Lanterns, man. How do you feel about Sinestro? Iconic villain?
Sinestro is an excellent example of a villain, and I of all the so-called arch nemesis villains out there, I think Sinestro comes across. I don't always think of him as a villain, because I actually think that he's just a different kind of politics.
Real quick, do you want to pop out and pop back in, because the static is getting really hard to hear you?
Yeah, mine was. I can try popping in and out. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just address viewer comments while you do that. Tehillim says Captain Cold. Yeah, man, we talked about Captain Cold a little bit at the beginning of the show. I definitely refer you to go check that out. Tevye Smoko says General Zod is a great villain, and his family like Ursa and his son. I think General Zod is a good villain. I don't think I would necessarily put him on like a top list of iconic villains in my book, but he certainly presents a challenge to Superman, because not only is he physically as competent, but he's more mentally structured and regimented because of his war experience. And I think that makes him a serious threat to Superman. I don't know. Is everybody in the live chat and everybody at home feeling different from me? Is Zod an all-time iconic villain to you? Let's see. Mark McKeever says, sort of on the other side, he says Doomsday is the most overrated villain. Sorry, Dan Jurgens. I mean, I think Doomsday served a point in the plot of the death of Superman, and I think beyond that, Doomsday's purpose is pretty much done. But now that Boom has rejoined us, Boom, you were saying about Sinestro. The last thing I had heard was that you don't as much consider Sinestro a villain, and I think that's interesting.
Well, I think Sinestro has a valid point that the universe is based on fear. I think that while I don't want to get all spiritual and philosophical or blah blah, but I mean, fear is the mind killer, and fear does govern many things, and there's an element of fear in everything, and he's just more controlling. He rules with a more iron hand, and who's to say that's not necessarily better in some parts of the galaxy than other parts of the galaxy? I think that this has been played a little bit with in Green Lantern comic books, but the fact is that Sinestro lost his Green Lantern ring because of politics. He never lost his ring because he was doing a bad job. He lost his ring because the Guardians thought that he was ruling the planet instead of just protecting them. I mean, there's a fine line between governing and protecting in many ways. And I don't necessarily think, it might be an outlier here, that I don't think Sinestro was a villain per se when he was initially rejected by the Green Lantern Corps. And then when the universe comes under attack, the galaxy comes under attack, you need guys like Sinestro, probably more so than you need a group of Green Lanterns, quite frankly. So anyways, we can disagree on that. I'm not saying you would even agree or disagree with me, but I like Sinestro because he rides that fine line, and Sinestro genuinely does not see himself as a villain at all. He doesn't see himself as a villain. He sees himself as the guy that's willing to take the bullet to get the job done, and that's what makes him so compelling. Because, and of course, we said that before. The best villains don't think of themselves as villains.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. I think Sinestro becomes what he needs to be to get the job done, and whether or not it causes him to be labeled as a villain by the people around him, I don't think he gives a shit, frankly. I think sometimes he is clearly corrupted by his exposure to the entity of Parallax. I think that's kind of what makes him a little bit more of an extremist. And you see that in many stories where he does get kind of overtaken with the deep desire to cause overwhelming fear, and it doesn't as much amount to his ends of saving the universe or structuring the universe. But I think largely, yes, I think we're very much on the same boat here, in that the thing that makes Sinestro great is he has his own overwhelming good to aspire to, and whether or not that is everybody else's good definition of good, I don't think he cares. And I think it's aside from the fact that he is, with his ability to wield either the green or the yellow ring with great prowess, it makes him also physically formidable of a villain, right? Like, I mean, he's gone toe to toe with Superman. Him and Hal have gone at it many times. And if you look at Hal Jordan's history, he is an overwhelming powerhouse in the DC universe. I mean, hell, if you guys haven't checked it out already, highly recommend Robert Venditti's first volume of Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. It was his book at the beginning of DC Rebirth. It is astoundingly good. It is a Hal Jordan Sinestro story. It breaks new boundaries. So if you like the direction that goes in, you got like 50 issues worth of stories you can continue into. But it is really good, like to the point where at the beginning of the book, Hal Jordan is without a Green Lantern ring, and he embodies will to such a degree that he made his own goddamn ring. So another reading recommendation. Now you have Irredeemable from Boom, and from me, the first volume of Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps. So make sure you guys go check those out. Tevye Smoka suggests the evil Tim Drake future Batman from the future who tries to kill John Kent Superboy. Interesting, iconic. I would say it's an interesting idea for a villain. I 100% Tevye respectfully would disagree with you. I don't think it's I don't think he's iconic at all. In fact, I think he's largely forgettable. I think unless you are absolutely enamored with the sort of narrative of the Super Sons, I think you're probably going to forget about, what was his name? Savior. He became Savior instead of Batman, which I think was ultimately kind of dumb. But he's a really interesting concept for a villain that I think started out overwhelmingly strongly in the story, but at the end of the day ended up kind of becoming this awkward plot device from my mind. So again, to me, I'd call him interesting. Iconic would not be the term I would use to describe it. I don't know, Boom, do you feel differently about future Tim Drake Batman / Savior?
Well, I wasn't impressed with that storyline, but I know where Tevye is coming from. I think he's making the point that when we were talking about earlier about just, how, it's, you're one slip away from, sometimes you're only, there's 6 degrees of separation. There's 6 degrees of separation or less between a hero and a villain. And Tim Drake becoming a villain in that storyline I thought it was, believable as sort of an Elseworlds tale. It was kind of a messy little tale while DC was still trying to find itself. So, but some villains' journey, some of the heroes in the villains' journey work, and some of them don't. But I appreciate where he's coming from. I mean, I'm a Super Sons fan too, so.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love me the Super Sons, but to call, the character iconic, I think is definitely overinflating his importance, his impact, and things of that nature. But, to each their own. Tehillim asks a really interesting question here for you, Boom. What if Wonder Woman had a villain by the name of Twisted Sister to be her Joker? Any thoughts?
I would love that idea. To be honest with you, I actually... There's a Wonder Woman villain on the Superman animated or the Justice League animated cartoon called Artesia that has never made an appearance in the mainstream DC universe, and she was a villain. And while she's not a Twisted Sister, I would like to see her. There's so much Wonder Woman potential. I would like to see Artesia from the Justice League animated make an appearance, but also a Twisted Sister. Originally, that's what Artemis was supposed to be, kind of a Twisted Sister. At least that's my take on it. So some people would disagree with me on that, but Wonder Woman needs a psychotic, twisted, unforgiving, unredeemable villain. She kind of had that in Genocide, but even Genocide because Genocide is actually Wonder Woman's future corpse, brought back to life. Long story. But in any event, you know, the thing is, the problem with Wonder Woman, and it's not necessarily a problem, is that sometimes the villain, if the villain can only be as interesting as the hero, sometimes that can be a problem. The best villains make the heroes better. And sometimes, with the case of Wonder Woman, and I'm going to say something that some people may not agree with, but I'm going to say it because I feel very strongly about this. I've read Wonder Woman for decades, and I think Wonder Woman happens to be the kind of hero that just naturally attracts boring villains. I've never been really, there isn't a single Wonder Woman villain that I look at, with the possible exception of Maxwell Lord, that I feel is truly villainous or really truly challenges her. Maybe Veronica Cale on a good day, and it's just because everyone who writes Wonder Woman, they want to write a villain that brings out Wonder Woman's compassion and love and forgiveness. And I say, enough of that. Challenge her. Challenge her so that her magic lasso is useless, her compassion is useless, her kindness is useless, and you can't solve every problem with love. Sometimes you got to be smart. Sometimes you got to think yourself out of it. Batman is challenged that way. Superman is challenged that way. But Wonder Woman always conveniently solves a problem by getting on her knees, supplicating herself, and using her magic lasso. And that's because the writers don't give her a compelling enough villain.
Unless you're the exception of Maxwell Lord, in which case your neck is sun-napped. But I think you make a really interesting point there. And I am... So I'm not the world's biggest Wonder Woman fan, but I have read more than a handful of Wonder Woman stories. And I think that my Wonder Woman is somewhere between Greg Rucka's and Brian Azzarello's. And I know that's sacrilege. It's either one or the other, or you are a lunatic. And either way, if you are one, you are a lunatic to the other. But to me, my Wonder Woman is somewhere in between. My Wonder Woman is the one who will always lead with compassion and love, but will not be afraid to snap motherfuckers' necks if that is what it comes down to. She's a warrior. She's been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. If somebody has more of an accurate timeline, feel free to correct me. But I mean, really, she's a warrior princess. So where I believe she leads with love and compassion, I think she is very much willing to do what she deems necessary to be done. And on that, I do want to bring up this very generous anonymous tip, although my PayPal informs me of who it is, and it is the ever wonderful and the ever dedicated Aaron VO. I want to thank you so much for this generous contribution. If anybody wants to contribute in the same way that Aaron VO did, feel free to use the Stream Elements tip link below. You can attach a comment. I know when things get busy on the live stream, we can't always read every comment. This 100% guarantees that your live comment gets read, addressed. If it's a question, it gets answered. And every little bit of that goes directly back into the channel to upgrade equipment, backgrounds, things of that nature, things to review. So with that, I do want to share Aaron's comment with you all. And woo! I pressed the wrong button. Okay, wait. Let us take a moment for me to figure out technology, friends. There we go. Although it says anonymous, like I said, I am aware that it is Aaron VO. Thanks to my good old PayPal. He says, thanks for these streams, dude. Always a great time. Can't wait for Area 51, the Helix Project. Well, thank you for coming to these streams, man. And thank you to everybody who comes to these streams. I appreciate it. It's literally just me talking comics with friends and with you guys and making friends out of you guys. So I really appreciate it. And I'm glad you're having a good time. I also can't wait for Area 51, the Helix Project, as biased as that might be. I'm super stoked for you guys to see it. And I am super stoked to get that out into the world. So I appreciate that very much. And yeah, man, thanks again. Very, very kind of you. Let's see.
I got one.
What's up, man? Listen.
What do you think of that villain?
I love Ra's al Ghul so much. Or I think the proper pronunciation is Ra's al Ghul. I don't remember anymore. I looked up this video that was like talking about the actual like pronunciation, and that I think it's pronounced Raz, but it has this Arabic character in it that's called a Raish, and that's why some people call him Raish and not Raz, but it's actually Raz. Who the fuck knows? We're gonna go somewhere in between there. As long as it's not like Raz Al Ghul, we're good. We can still be friends. I think Raish is great. I think in many ways he I don't know if I think he's identified Batman's core wounds, but he's so mentally formidable, and he's this fascist kind of version of Batman in many ways, right? He's lived so many lifetimes. He's jaded. He's willing to do the things that Batman cannot, and his goals are so much more absolute than Batman's are. And I think in many ways, yes, he identifies and maybe prods at some of Batman's core wounds, and at Batman's heart in ways that I think Superman villains prod at his. But Ra's al Ghul, I think, is a stupendously interesting character that doesn't get enough recognition. And for my money, like I've talked many times about how I have a Batman pitch in my head. There's very much a Ra's al Ghul story in there. He's one of my favorite Batman villains of all time. I think he's absolutely fantastic. And a Ra's al Ghul tattoo on my Batman arm is very soon to come. But obviously, Boom, you brought him up. Like, so what makes you say Ra's al Ghul? Same as me, something different? What does everybody in the chat think of Ra's al Ghul as well? Boom. I can't hear you at all. I don't know if you're trying to speak or not, but you're practically frozen. You might want to pop in and out again, maybe. I'm not sure. I know you were good for a little while. I don't know if you can hear me at all. There we go. Okay, hopefully he pops back in. And while we're waiting for him, we're definitely going to get through a couple more of these live chats. Taylor Pector says, I think Flash has a very underrated rogues gallery that is sadly overshadowed by evil speedsters. I agree. I think his rogues gallery not only presents just this interesting, eclectic, kind of colorful group, I think they're all, for the most part, very individual in their motives, in their personalities. And I think that they all deserve a lot more time to be fleshed out in many ways, and they deserve time that they haven't been, for the most part, given already. So yeah, I very much agree with you, Taylor. I think in many ways it is annoying that it feels like the ultimate kind of evil to the Flash stories are speedsters, and in ways that I think the Joker is oversaturated, that is also very oversaturated, because when you oversaturate with something that's good, it just becomes boring, to say the least. Let's see. Is Boom gonna make it back on? Waiting for it to connect.
1, 2, 3.
Let's see.
Okay.
Okay, I can hear you now. We are a little bit choppy on the audio, but I am very much prepared for your reasoning on why you have showed the world your marvelous Ra's al Ghul action figure. Take it away, my man.
Well, hopefully you can hear me now. No, I've always been fascinated by immortality, and I've always been immortal villains always fascinate me. Like Vandal Savage is one of my favorite villains, and same with Ra's al Ghul. And yet, I like it when they're not villains as well, because Vandal Savage has been an anti-hero and a good guy from time to time. And Ra's al Ghul has also had his moments in the sun, not just the darkness. And because I've always asked myself, if I lived long enough, would I eventually become is evil? Would I naturally become so indifferent to humanity that I become evil and not realize it, or would I become more compassionate, more loving if I live 200 or 300 or 400 years old? And that's what makes those villains so compelling. Like, how can you be so old? Don't you get wisdom? Doesn't wisdom breed kindness and compassion, or does wisdom breed indifference and fascism? You know what I mean? I find those questions fascinating, and we'll never know those answers because none of us are immortal. But I find it interesting because I note that most people, as they get older, generally become more easygoing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Generally speaking. So I don't know. So I always find it interesting with Ra's al Ghul, his agenda. You know, he keeps coming back again and again and again, and yet he still seems to have, you know, the same agenda. Whereas Vandal Savage, I kind of liked his immortality because in Vandal Savage, he was actually kind of a good guy under Snyder's Justice League run, and he helped the Justice League, and he even prevented Lex Luthor from getting the piece of the totality because even he thought it was wrong. So he's always had an interesting relationship between his dark and light side, so to speak.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And in a way, I think Ra's al Ghul represents this sort of teeter-totter, right? Like you were saying, how do you develop as a person when you're an immortal? And to me, it's like, he probably ends up on one end and he gets close to the center. And maybe at one point he was kind of balanced. But over time, he goes over to the other end and you start leaning until the other side of the seesaw hits the ground and you become another extreme. It's interesting, right? And like you said, that sort of meditation on what does immortality due to the psyche, especially with somebody who has the agency to affect whatever is in that head of his, right? And aside from that, what do the sort of cultural shifts mean, right? Because when you're immortal, you go through so many different changes in the world. And I would say the longer you live, the quicker those things feel, right? Life becomes quicker. Once you've lived 10,000 years, what is 10 of them, right? I mean, and I love, there's this cool little side story in Jason Aaron's Thor run where he discusses, some of these great battles that Thor doesn't even remember, because to him, to leave a lasting impression on an immortal's mind, it would have to be this knockdown, drag him out fight. Like when Thor was on Earth, he doesn't remember a majority of his conflicts where he fought for the Viking people or for whatever clan of Vikings that prayed to him, because what is 10 years to somebody who's lived 10,000? And I think very much you see that aspect in Ra's al Ghul. I think Ra's al Ghul certainly has a better memory than Thor, right? I think he intellectualizes things, and he's obviously a genius in ways that Thor is not. But even then, you look back, what when you're 2000, like, I mean, let's just put out a number, you're 2020 years old. How the hell are you supposed to remember how you felt about the world or why you felt the way you did about the world in the year 5 AD, So I think Ra's al Ghul brings up this very interesting point, and it, with this constant quest of Ra's to make Bruce his successor, it kind of brings up this question: how would Bruce change if he actually were to take over the seat of the demon's head? Because clearly he's capable. Does it make him more absolute in his vision for the world in the way that it does for Ra's? Does he become more compassionate? Maybe, who knows? I think it also depends on the type of person that is granted that immortality and how they sort of shift on a personal and mental and emotional level. Like I'm not gonna lie, DC, I have a Batman Elseworld story. I know you don't want continuity right now, where Batman becomes the demon's head reluctantly, and we see what happens there. So, I know you're hemorrhaging for money, AT&T, but I'm here. I work for cheap, not free. I know my worth, but definitely, I'm here for you guys. I think that was a great example, though, Ra's al Ghul. But you bring up Old Guard, which I know is deals with that sort of theme of immortality.
Yeah, that was it. I just wanted it's a good segue from what you're talking about there about the lead character, and of course you can watch it on Netflix. Charlize Theron, fantastic movie. It's just a fun action movie. It's not going to break any barriers or nothing, but it's just a fun immortal movie, movie about immortals. And what makes it interesting is that she's lived for so long, in excess of, it's never stated, but Greg Reck has stated in interviews, she's in excess of 6,000 years old. And she has literally been a devil and a savior and an angel. She's been a slaveholder. She's been a warmonger. She's been everything. She's been your worst nightmare, and she's evolved into a hero. But it's a 6,000 year journey for her. And that's what makes it so fascinating. And the compelling nature of that story is these immortals, they don't know why they're suddenly born. They don't know why they become immortal. And they don't know why they suddenly die. Some will live for 100 years. Some will live for 6,000. But they're on a journey, and they don't know what the journey is. But all they know is that they end up helping humanity in some way. And it's a really great story. And it's a great concept. Greg Rucka really hit on something there. And what it says about what it means to be a villain and what it means to be a hero. I mean, I still say you take a hero from the 16th century and you put him in modern day New York, he'd be arrested. He might be arrested for aggravated assault in 10 minutes, right? I mean,
that's true.
I mean, a hero, you can be a hero in one century and a villain in another century. I really think it's a question of when you're born, because I think a lot of people, a lot of the aggressive, take an aggressive wife beater that beats his kids and spends half his time in jail and he's drunk. He'd be a warrior on the battlefield, sleeping with all the maidens and the hero of his tribe if he was born in the 17th century, right?
Now you bring up a really interesting point, and for those of you watching, there's another good bit of recommended reading for the day. I feel like we need to start taking note of the books. I feel like we always recommend something. So far you have Irredeemable for a great villain redemption story. What the fuck did I suggest? I suggested something. I don't even remember anymore. Somebody might have to go back and remind me.
Wasn't it a Joker?
No, it was Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps Volume 1 from the start of Rebirth, and now you have it, the old guard, and go watch the movie. Why not? We know you all have Netflix, and if you lie, well, we can't be friends for the next 10 seconds. Anyways, Tevye Smolka brings up, what about the Batman Who Laughs? Or is he overused? Boy, overused is an understatement. I'm so done with the fucking Laffy Taffy Batman Who Laughs. Get me something different. Clearly, I love me some Batman, but Jesus fucking Christ. It is everything that has been overbaked about Batman, everything that has been overbaked about the Joker, and into one massively overbaked package. The Batman Who Laughs, I think, started becoming something iconic during his inception and is just dwindled down into the lowest common denominator. Get him the fuck out of my books, please. No, the Batman Who Laughs is not iconic. Boom, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and I hope the static's not too bad on your end. But with Batman Who Laughs, I think Scott Snyder has sort of violated one of the rules that there ought to be. Not that there necessarily are rules on doing villains, but the Batman Who Laughs has become a Gary Sue. The Batman Who Laughs was originally interesting because he was a counterpoint to Batman in that he was what Batman could do if Batman became evil and had no filter. And unfortunately, Scott Snyder's taken it to the next step, and Batman Who Laughs can never be defeated. Well, look, Batman can be defeated. So if Batman has a counterpoint, Batman's counterpoint can be defeated as well. I mean, to suggest that Batman's counterpoint, who's evil, can never be defeated, and then actually write him like he can never be defeated, like the Batman Who Laughs is. Batman Who Laughs cannot be defeated. He's a Gary Sue character, and I've lost interest in the character, not just because he's overused, but because he can't die. He never loses. He's always smiling. He's always smirking. He rarely expresses pain. He doesn't it's no fun to have a villain who doesn't lose once in a while. I like heroes that lose. I like villains who lose. That's what makes the drama fun. But when the villain is always winning and there's never an ending, and it just gets tiring after a while. You know, it's that tension between hero and villain that you need. And it's not there anymore between Batman and the Batman Who Laughs.
Yeah, no, you make a very good point. I think anybody with their head screwed on properly can acknowledge that the Batman Who Laughs is just such an overused concept and could have, like many of these other villains we've discussed, been something formidable and something sort of terrifying to present in a story to our heroes. But now I just don't fucking care, and I think that I can pretty much, I think my friend here pretty much echoes that sentiment. Let's see. Aaron VO, on the topic of pronouncing Ra's al Ghul, says, my brother speaks Arabic. According to him, it's supposed to be pronounced like Retz. But it's a comic book, and in reality, we can say it however the fuck we want. I say it like Raz. Don't say it like Raz. That's the worst way to say it, definitively. I need some L's in the chat right now because Raz is the fastest way to catch an L. I feel like it's either maybe Retz or whatever, but I could deal with Raish or Raz. Hard A, O-shaped A. I don't know. That's just me. Raz, unacceptable. Like that lady from the Batman Begins. She's like, excuse me, Mr. Ra's al Ghul. Yeah, don't be that lady, please. Don't do this to me, Aaron. Taylor Pector says what Rucka did with Raish and his detective run and Death and the Maidens is the best material he's had as a villain. I'm trying to. Are you talking about Batman Evolution? Is that what you're talking about? Which like it's sitting by my bed counter at the moment. But is that what? Boom? Can you confirm? Is that exactly what he's talking about?
Well, I've Death and the Maidens it was a 4-issue series, and it introduced a character. It introduced another one of Roz's daughters named Nisa Al Ghul, and it was really good. It was drawn by Frank Miller's often partner, artistic partner. In any event, I enjoyed Death and the Maidens. I wasn't sure if it stayed in continuity or not, but I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to remember the plot line now, but it was quite good. I liked it more for what it said about Nisa Al Ghul. I'm trying to remember the plot line. It's been I think 15 years old now, or 12. It's an old storyline, but or maybe it's only 12 years old. I think it is.
Is the artist, is it Klaus Janson that you're suggesting?
Yes. That's what it is. Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Got you. Yeah. Interesting. I'm pretty sure that's Evolution. I might be wrong, but let's see here. Just my trusty bot reminding you that if you like this discussion, well, then click the little like button below and let me know, because us small guys need all the little bit of YouTube helps we can get. So if you're enjoying this video, even if you don't, give me a like, because I'm a whore for likes. Anyways, let's scroll down. We're gonna have to skip a couple to catch up.
I was gonna suggest another thing. Another character that I think is very interesting is Black Adam, because it's another character that, especially with Dwayne Johnson, I think it's so fascinating. I wonder if we did a survey with pop culture right now, would most people consider Black Adam a good guy or a bad guy? Because he's actually supposed to be a bad guy, yet he's very much an anti-hero. Jeff Johns wrote him in Justice Society is definitely more of an anti-hero, certainly riding the curve of heroism for a while, and then becoming leader of Kondak. And so I don't know, is Black Adam good or bad? And the answer to that question is what's so fascinating and what makes him interesting. The fact that there's no clear answer makes it a very human character, and what makes him so compelling and arguably more interesting, especially when he's talking about, forming a team, JSA, and they're going to replace the Trinity. He's stepping up and challenging Superman for the mantle of most popular in the DC universe. This is all pop culture, DC hype from Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. But it's interesting, and I think he can do that off the strength of the character of Black Adam, who forces us to maybe ask ourselves, well, maybe we can be darker and still be heroic.
And what's interesting is I've always found a real kinship between Black Adam and Sinestro. I think they're similar in many ways, in the way that they identify their motives, and the way that they will kind of almost narrow-mindedly act on their motives, irregardless of the sort of ethical boundaries set by the society that they live in. I don't know, is that just me? Do you find that connection as well between Sinestro and Black Adam?
Definitely. In fact, they could be brothers in the same. I think they were in the same political science class, because I think Sinestro and Black Adam. I think Black Adam. My understanding of his history there, in terms of when he ruled ancient Egypt or some ancient Egyptian city, and he gained the power of Shazam, and he abused it. While arguably Sinestro did the very same thing as a Green Lantern. There's a lot of similarities there. In fact, you actually allude to a very good point. And maybe this has been done before, but I wonder if there's ever been a Black Adam or Sinestro team up, because I think they would be birds of a feather.
Yeah, I very much think it would be an interesting sort of collaboration between the two. And I feel like, if anything, you could definitely see a conflict between them, kind of straying very slightly from the way they view what is their absolute good, and kind of butting heads over that. But John Thomas brings up an interesting one. He says Scarecrow is underrated, in his humble opinion. More could be done with him. I feel fear is paralyzing and an ingredient for great stories. I agree. I think Scarecrow. Listen, I think a majority of Batman's sort of B-list villains that are also like A-list compared to other characters' rogues galleries could still really use some real good writing hands to beef him up, including like Mr. Freeze. Like nobody, like Mr. Freeze has been reshaped by Paul Dini into this really tragic, like villain with an incredible backstory and this humanity to them that has never been seen, and nobody has told a story to evolve upon that since then. It's kind of frustrating if you ask me. But in many ways, I think Scarecrow has just as much potential, and his methodology to and I should say the danger about him is that there is something very primal about fear. It is inescapable, right? And I think in many ways you could take Jonathan Crane's Scarecrow and do some incredible things. So is he iconic? I would say yes, because I think even as low as Batman's C-list of rogues could be considered iconic, or the argument could be made for so. But I think Scarecrow does, for very good reasons, have the potential to be the upper echelon of iconic villain. I don't know, Boom. Am I blowing too much smoke up Scarecrow's mask?
Well, I don't have any right to tell you what villain to like. For me, I've never felt like I've really understood Scarecrow, to be honest with you. In fact, I don't even know what Scarecrow's actual name is. Do you?
Jonathan Crane.
Oh, wait, thank you. I guess I probably did know that in the back of my head. I've never found him to be a particularly compelling villain myself, because he just uses fear gas. I don't really know much about Jonathan Crane. What motivates him? Why does he use fear gas? I don't even remember his origin off the top of my head. Like I don't know. I don't really. Why use the fear gas? I guess that's his. He uses that instead of a weapon or a gun. I've never understood how bringing out the fear in someone, how is that a weapon? Because if I want to corner you and terrorize you, if I bring out your most fearful part of you, shouldn't I be afraid that you might hurt me? Like, how does that help me as a villain? If I want to rob a bank, how am I going to, by causing everyone to be fearful, they're not going to remain calm. Wouldn't you rather them just lay on the ground and let you rob the bank? Do you really want them to go crazy and be fearful and go psychotic? Like I've never understood the logic of the Scarecrow, to be honest with you. I don't find him myself to be that compelling a villain, except when conveniently, obviously, when Batman, he's hit with the gas and he exhibits his greatest fear, but he's kind of a one-hit wonder. So in my mind, you know what I mean? Like, because how many fears can Batman exhibit? Really? Like,
well, I think a great many. I think the thing about the Scarecrow is that he just hasn't been properly utilized yet. I think in many ways he has a lot of applicability, because fear is such a sort of blanket concept that can be approached in a number of different ways, right? I mean, we're all paralyzed by fear in many ways. Fear can be an inhibition. Fear can be an a sort of promoter of certain things. It can do a number of different things. And I think Batman's, I'm not going to speak it out loud because I have a bomb ass Scarecrow arc in my head and y'all aren't stealing my shit. But let me tell you, I have a real good way of playing on Batman's fears with Scarecrow. And I think that there are a number of different ways to where Scarecrow could actually be used in so many different versatile ways and combat so many characters. Sure, maybe he's not as fleshed out as he could be, but man, when it comes down to it, I mean, we all experience fear. Our heroes, our villains, everybody in the DC universe and in our universe experience fear. And how everybody responds to fear and different types of fear, I think is profoundly interesting. And it gives you a lot of storytelling potential there in my mind. So, I think John Thomas brings up an interesting one, and I agree with his sentiment. I think Scarecrow is underrated, and I think Scarecrow deserves better hands, aka, hi DC, I have hands. But John, I agree with you full-heartedly. Mark McKeever says that his favorite depiction of Lex Luthor was from John Byrne's late 80s Superman run. The arrogance to laugh off the fact that an alien would masquerade as a mild-mannered reporter, plus the kryptonite ring. I think you definitely see shades of that in All-Star Superman as well when Clark goes to visit him in jail. But, you know, we brought up Lex Luthor very vaguely, and obviously Lex is one of the most iconic villains of all time. I think you can make the argument that he's a top 5 villain of all time, any medium. But I know that Boom is probably going to be able to speak much more intelligently on, you know, the relation to John Byrne's run. So Boom, take it away. Lex Luthor specifically in John Byrne's run. How do you feel? And even outside of that.
That's my favorite Lex Luthor incarnation. Yeah, that was me. That was my formative years, you know, reading comics in the 80s. I started reading in 76. I loved when the John Byrne run started 85, 86 with Man of Steel. I love the fatter corporate Lex Luthor with the kryptonite ring. And Mark McKeever mentions it perfectly about, you know, being so arrogant, refusing to believe that Superman could be a mild-mannered reporter like Clark Kent, and just being just so powerful a corporate businessman that he, on his corporate power and arrogance and narcissism alone, he felt more powerful than Superman himself. And to be honest with you, that's something to admire in Lex Luthor. And that's one of the reasons why I admire him so much as a villain, because even the greatest villains do have traits that we can admire. I mean, Lex Luthor had self-confidence. To have the self-confidence, the healthy self-image, to be fat and balding, and to look at Superman and maybe resent him because he's got a better body than you, but know deep down that you're just as smart as he is, and to have the arrogance and the self-confidence to put into motion long-term plans to underscore and to hurt your enemy or your perceived enemy. I mean, there is something. Look, Lex Luthor was a jerk and he's evil, but that corporate evil, that was something you can really relate to. You know, this wasn't a Lex Luthor making scientific gadgets that didn't make any sense, or pseudo comic book science. No, this was Lex Luthor using corporate greed, corporate, you know, buyouts, utilizing his business intellect and just buying and selling, manipulating people, using the media to put down Superman, a genuine supervillain that we could relate to in our time, in the real world, not just in the comic books. Just the best heroes are the ones that we can imagine what they would be like if they existed in our world. The John Byrne Superman of the 80s is a supervillain that we could imagine really exists in our world 10 times over. And that's why it works so well, and that's why it resonated. And to know, and it makes us, I don't care what anybody says, to know that even a corporate guru from the 80s can take a bite out of Superman once in a while, that puts a smile on my face from time to time when I'm a little bit inebriated.
No, it's true. I think Lex Luthor is sort of the perfect foe for Superman, because Superman represents to almost an extreme all that is good with humanity. And what happens when Luthor, who is sort of this culmination of agency given to all that is sort of bad amongst our society, what happens, you know, when it is actually a competition between those two inherently sort of not supernatural, these sort of inherently elemental forces of good and evil, and it becomes, you know, this kind of discouraging conflict, right, where, you know, Superman, the embodiment of everything good, can still be taken down a notch by this guy that embodies the sort of exact opposite sentiments, and it becomes this, you know, interesting narrative of watching, you know, this sort of ultimate battle in ways of humanity's goodness and humanity's lesser qualities. And I think that's profoundly interesting. Adam Henley says human nature has a compass. Roz has no compass and can pull the trigger on a generation. He is a true immortal, but Bruce, however, is a man and therefore unfit to lead as a god. Well, I disagree with your first statement. I think Raish does have a compass. I think Roz knows exactly what he's doing. And I think that he's lived so long that he's very much fine-tuned his compass to a very absolute degree. I think it always points north. I don't think that there's any room for calibration, right? Where you and I might calibrate our moral compass. A little bit of a plug. We actually did a show on the moral compass of modern superheroes a little while back. So if that conversation interests you, go check that out after you watch this video. But Ra's al Ghul very much to me has an uncalibrated moral compass that is defined in a very narrow way because of his experience. He's been conditioned. And unlike us, unlike our heroes, I think in ways they calibrate their moral compass in order to reflect the situation and the time that they live in ways that Ra's al Ghul does not. And I think one could make the argument that no one is fit to lead as God, right? No, Bruce nor Ra's, right? I mean, Ra's is a villain. I think one would argue that a villain should not be leading this immortal group of assassins. Should anybody? Should Batman? I don't think so. You know, what does that do to somebody? So I think the back half, you know, I would spread out and more so generalized to not just Bruce. I don't even think Ra's is really fit to lead the League of Shadows. But again, I do kind of disagree on your first statement there. I do very much think that Ra's does have a moral compass, but I think it is so absolute in the direction that it points in. Any comments on that, Boom?
Yeah, I would just qualify. I think, does Roz have no moral compass? He says no compass. I think he means no moral compass. I think Roz probably does have a moral compass, but he, like you said, he's very hard line about it. He's almost indifferent about it. He's willing to sacrifice human life because of his strict moral code, and it might be a strict moral code more on the immoral side. But he's, you know, he can be. Roz has been written differently by different writers, so we got to be, in fairness to the person who said that comment. Roz has been written more evil in some stories than he has in others. So that you know, it depends on what Roz story you're focusing on. Roz has always been sort of an insane environmentalist. You know, he's willing to sacrifice human life just to preserve the planet, or at least in the classically in the 70s, he was prepared to do that. A lot of some of those Neil Adams runs, but there was more there. Or Batman as a God, Batman as a God, I don't think would be. Bruce is disturbed. Batman is the only thing that prevents Batman from going full evil, in my view, is that, for whatever reason, he's obsessed with not killing. And that's it. For whatever reason, he's so obsessed against not killing, and it's rammed in his head. He doesn't want to kill. He won't even kill the Joker. That's the only thing that prevents him from going. I mean, if he ever kills, he's going to be like, he's probably going to go full gonzo, crazy supervillain, because he's got so much darkness in him. Or at least he was written that way in the 80s. He's starting to lighten up a little bit more under Snyder. You know, he's even like buddy with Starro on his shoulder and stuff. So he's lightening up a little bit. He's not as dark as he was under Miller, but you know, if it wasn't for Batman's code against killing, he would be. I don't know if he would be. You know, he's become more of a family man in the last few years, at least. You know, under Snyder. And it's interesting that Johns is exploring something a little different with Three Jokers. But even in Three Jokers, Batman has more of he loves Jason, and he loves Barbara, and he cares for them. And it's hard, but I still wouldn't want Batman as a god. That would bother me.
That's fair. No, I agree. Like I said, I don't think any man is necessarily fit to be God. And even the sort of more godly figure in the DC universe like Superman is so in touch with humanity that, you know, it is kind of defies our conceptions of godhood in many ways. So and also Adam Henley kind of follows up here and says the Latin A is pronounced ah, so it's probably Ra for Ra's al Ghul. Well, I mean, Ra's al Ghul isn't Latin, he's Middle Eastern, so I don't know if it necessarily applies. I don't exactly know the Arabic phonetics, so I don't know. It sounds like, based on what Aaron VO was saying, maybe Raz is closer, but I don't think it's for that exact reasoning there. let's see. We're gonna have to jump down some questions to catch up, as we are coming down to a clean old hour and a half long show. Silver Batman Ranger asks, "Hey everybody, who have you talked about already?" A lot, my friend. You came in at about an hour into the show. So we definitely got into a lot. So I definitely invite you to go start the beginning of the episode again to get back into it. Let's see. Tavia Smolka asks, Dark Knight Nation, what Brother Eye is that AI iconic or just overused like the terrible futures? You might have to reword that question for me, buddy. I don't exactly know what you're getting at. Is Brother Eye iconic? If that's your question, no. Do I love Brother Eye? Yeah, I think Brother Eye is a great idea. I love the OMAC project. It's I wouldn't call it a guilty pleasure because I do genuinely think Rucka did a good job with that story and the lead up. But I think Brother Eye is a really good villain. Is he iconic? Probably not so much in my mind. I don't know. Like, Boom, do you consider Brother Eye iconic? I feel like they really only pull him out in very rare situations.
Yeah, well, I view Brother Eye. Brother Eye is the artificial intelligence version of almost like an extreme Lex Luthor who doesn't like metahumans, right? Brother Eye wants to keep metahumans at bay and wants to eliminate metahumans off the planet, and metahumans are ultimately the threat, or at least that was the plot line leading into Infinite Crisis. You know, Brother Eye was getting involved in wanting to eliminate, with the help of natural order, eliminating all the villains, and so. In that sense, you know, the idea that, well, and this even plays into the three Jokers, right? I mean, is if those people who wear a mask, if you wear a mask, aren't you just masking a darker version of yourself? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid people will see? Is it really just about protecting your secret identity, or is it about something far more introspective? Are you trying to hide the darker versions of yourself? And Brother Eye is that artificial intelligence that says, you know, enough. You know, if you're wearing a mask, you need to be eliminated, and because you're a threat. And Brother Eye, when you think about it, is a computer, and it has artificial intelligence. And there's a concept called the singularity. And those, if you guys want to Google singularity on Google, and what the singularity is that when true and when the concept is really simple, when true artificial intelligence comes online, when it actually comes into existence, it will create a singularity, and literally every answer that all of us have, we will immediately have every question that we have about anything will immediately be answerable because of the singularity, because all the answers will be immediately available to us. And the moment all the answers to all our questions are immediately available to us, then work becomes irrelevant, then all the problems are going to be solved, and then we're going to be at a new precipice with humanity where we can either destroy ourselves or it's a whole new ball game. I know I went off on a tangent there, but where I was going with that is that if an artificial intelligence concludes that heroes are a threat, that should make us think.
Interesting. No, I mean, it wouldn't be an episode of Let's Talk Comics without tangents. So there we are. There is one indeed. Let's see. Moving forward into some of these live chats. Oddball Comics says, "Hey, just got here. Who are we talking about? Villains, man. Plenty of villains." I said to Silver Batman Ranger, I definitely invite you to go check out earlier on in this episode once we conclude the live cast here, so that you can catch up to the conversation. Aaron VO poses a big bad question for us. Can we say Batman has never killed, though? Maybe he hasn't directly, but how many times has he left hanging from gargoyles? How many has he injured so small thugs could have died from injuries after he left? I think the question can be answered in twofold. I think most of the time we're left to assume that whatever way Batman leaves somebody is in a way that they can be saved, or they can be recaptured, or things of that nature. I mean, even 10 Nights of the Beast, where Batman locked the KG Beast into this dark, dank sort of room in the depths of the Gotham sewer. It was later retconned that, you know, he left him there for a couple days so that he would be weak by the time the cops found him and rescued him and incarcerated him. So I think that's pretty much what we're left to assume. Although I think that under many lesser writers, you do get a sloppier Batman. And unfortunately, because these characters are touched by so many different writers' hands and visions, oftentimes you can have some sort of contradictory representations of characters. And I think Batman is clearly no exception. I think the best of the Batman stories usually find Batman going out of his way to the degree that he makes the job exponentially more difficult for himself to prevent somebody from dying. I mean, he saved his villains countless times, even in stories like The Dark Knight Returns. When he has his final confrontation with Joker, spoilers for a book that's like 30 years old, he wasn't going to kill him. I mean, when he twisted the Joker's neck, he paralyzed him. He went as far at the ripe old age, was it 55 or 65, to get stabbed repeatedly by the Joker. And even then, he had this guilty conscience about him, about paralyzing this absolute monster from the neck down. And even then, he couldn't do the job. So I very much think that most of our great Batman stories find Bruce struggling with I think what would be a very easy victory for him to kill or to allow somebody to die. But it's also like a defining flaw in Bruce that I think makes stories at times more compelling for him, and it allows for more longevity. Because if Batman, let's be real, if Batman killed every criminal he came into contact with, which he could, let's be real, if Batman wanted to, he could kill the DC universe. But he doesn't, and that's the only way we get more Batman stories. And I know some people find that as a kind of sloppy quality of DC being this periodically published, piece of literature with a continuity. I think that it is an interesting character flaw for him, and I think that if done well, right, like, because anything about Batman or any of these characters has been done poorly by someone or some people multiple times over the years, but if done well, I think this flaw of Batman's can breed a lot of interesting story, one of which you're seeing in the Three Jokers. If Batman did kind of cross that line, we wouldn't have this problem. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there is definitely a line that is crossed in this book, and we're going to kind of figure out what comes out of that.
I would add to that leading into segueing into Two-Face. Bruce Wayne, when Batman first started in his first year as Batman, he really screwed up with a lot of the villains that he captured because they were immediately let go because he didn't have a working relationship with the police. So he would arrest them, he'd leave them hanging from poles, and he'd drop them off. He would throw them in front of the police station. Well, the police didn't know who the villains were, what they were involved in. Their rights were violated, et cetera, et cetera. It was Harvey Dent, the district attorney, that became friends with Batman and taught Batman how to apprehend villains and to bring them to the police in a manner in which they could be lawfully prosecuted. Now, this was very significant. And the point I'm going to make here is, I was going to egotistically say I mean this profound, but not in an egotistical sense, that Harvey Dent gave Batman many different options on how to capture villains lawfully and get away with it and still be Batman. Harvey Dent gave Batman many options that he could explore as Batman. The irony and the tragedy of Harvey Dent as a villain is that when Harvey Dent became Two-Face, he was watered down to two options: one side of the coin or the scar. And so the irony is that here's his best friend, Harvey Dent, or a good friend, who gives Batman all these options to become a better Batman, and yet Harvey Dent is cursed to become a villain, Two-Face, that only ever has two options. Everything's black and white. And the irony is that Harvey Dent, as a district attorney, he understood nuance. He was not black and white. He understood that that the intricacies of the law and the many different options you have. And yet all of that was destroyed when he became the villain. And that's what I find so fascinating about Harvey Dent. And that's why Batman is always so sympathetic to Harvey, because he knows that Harvey is just broken, in a lot like Wonder Woman's villains.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think you described Two-Face perfectly, and there's a reason why he's one of Batman's most iconic villains, and it is that ability, or is it that inability to look at nuance in the way that his former persona was, and I think Batman's ability to view nuance is the one thing that sort of keeps him from really jumping over the edge and becoming either one of those sides that sort of Two-Face represents here. Yeah, I mean, I really can't say that any better myself, man. You really hit the nail on the head there. And Aaron VO, regarding his topic of the Batman potentially killing people thing, he says, you can say can be. My point is, we cannot say for sure people have not died at Batman's hands. Sure, yeah. I mean, I think you could say that about literally anything, though. Like, we don't know. We don't know what goes on off panel. You know, Batman and Superman could have made googly eyes the first time they met, and we would never know either. You know, so I think it just becomes this kind of nebulous topic. I think we're left to assume that based on Batman's morals and his extreme self-control, that maybe, you know, and it's been shown that Batman cripples people. I mean, Batman will destroy your fucking life. He just won't kill you. You get that in the second arc of James Tynion's Detective Comics Rebirth run with, I think it's the Victim Syndicate or something like that, where there are people that Batman has saved or have become sort of casualties in the way of Batman's war on crime, and not directly affected by Batman, but you know, even maybe even tangentially. So, you know, you do see repercussions for Batman's actions, and actually, largely the Victim Syndicate is made or arises because Batman refused to step over the line and kill somebody because of his heart and his overwhelming desire to save all of humanity. That he's allowed these casualties to kind of come into place, which is really interesting. And if you haven't read it, I recommend it. Beautiful art by Eddie Barrows, by the way, absolutely astounding art. So. Something that kind of tickles that side of the conversation there that you bring up. And I think, let's definitely wind down. You know, I think Boom and I will come up with about one more villain apiece. And I think this conversation's been very DC heavy. So I think my last pull is going to be Marvel. Obviously, he's on the thumbnail. Let's talk about Loki. I think Loki is a profoundly great villain. His you deal with concepts of eternalism and with the sort of egotism of the gods. But I think the thing that makes him such a formidable opponent for Thor is obviously his wit. He identifies the playing field and shifts it so that it is one that is advantageous towards him. He will never engage Thor in a one-on-one fight unless it is a means to position Thor to some type of eventual downfall. And I think that's one of the things that makes Loki so iconic, is that he knows Thor's core wounds on an emotional and psychological level, but he also identifies Thor's strengths and weaknesses, and it has this kind of self-awareness that makes him an incredibly profound threat. He's not a heavy hitter, right? Thor is a heavy hitter. He's arguably, especially now, in comics, he's arguably Marvel's most powerful character in terms of their superhero lineup. And yet, you know, Loki continues to become a threat to not only Thor, but the Avengers and the rest of the MCU. And it is sort of, you know, it's what, in my mind, what makes him so formidable is his ability to kind of take a step back, acknowledge and become self-aware and redefine the game that he's playing rather than play the game that his opponent plays well. I don't know, Boom. Any comments on Loki? Do you think Loki is iconic? Is it just because of the movies, or do you think there's merit in his comic book counterpart as well?
I've just in the last 5 years really gotten into Thor and Loki. So, and I've really appreciated. I'm more, my experience with Loki in the comics. He seems to be more of a. I haven't really thought of him as a villain. He seems to be very much a trickster. He's always played both sides of the fence. I've never really thought of him as a hardcore villain per se, because just he seems to be the guy that becomes the villain, and then he betrays the villains he's with, and then he comes back, and then he's always, yeah. He was even Doctor Strange for a while. He was even Master of the Mystic Arts for a while, in just a couple of years ago, and I think that was even written by Donny Cates, I think. But in any event, I don't think of. Well, the interesting thing about Loki is he brings the family dynamic, the actual genuine family dynamic where I mean, it's one thing to have a brother you don't get along with, but when your brother is arguably your number one villain, that brings a whole new set of angst there that is that really elevates things. I know Jason Aaron did a good job during Jane Foster's Thor run in addressing the relationship between Loki and Odinson Thor and then Highfather and their mother. I forget their mother's name, but
Whoa.
Freda. I think it was Freda.
Whoa, I'm sorry. I just got real distracted. Fucking breaking news. Chadwick Boseman, who plays Black Panther, passed away today.
How?
Colon cancer.
Are you serious?
I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Black Panther star Chadwick Boseman has passed away. A new report from AP says the actor best known for leading the role as T'Challa in the Marvel Studios franchise has died after a 4-year battle with colon cancer. He was 43 years old.
No way.
Whoa.
That's a villain for you right there, man. Fuck cancer.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow, man.
That
hurts. He was an incredibly talented guy, and I know that he put a lot into various humanitarian efforts. And man, he will. He is my Black Panther.
Yeah,
you know,
man.
Jesus.
That's tribute to the man. That sucks. I can't believe that. I mean,
holy shit.
They kept that under wraps pretty good. Wow. Wow.
Man. That is rough. That really is. You know what sucks too, man, is I feel like in the last 10 years, and obviously because of his Black Panther success, his career has really skyrocketed. And for that to happen, that's horrible. That's so bad, man. He is. Oh, that's so tragic. That hurts, man. You know, but my best wishes goes out to his family and to his friends. And wow, that's really rough. God, man, this is. I hope AP and I hope it's wrong. I hope it's fucking wrong, man. I really, really do. Jesus. You know, on that, I don't know. It kind of drains the life out of me, honestly, to hear that. So I think it's about time we close up shop for the night. Unfortunately, sorry to end on such a not so great note, but I do want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It was up until this point a fantastic conversation, and everybody provided a lot of depth into this discussion, and I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you to those who contribute to the channel, that like these videos and participate and become a part of the community. Obviously, I want to thank my partner in crime here, Comic Boom, for obviously sitting down and chatting with me. Tevia says TMZ can't be trusted. This isn't from TMC, buddy. I already said it's from AP. But yeah, on that note, I know Comic Boom, like myself, has already dropped a review to 3 Jokers, which his is excellent. If you have to check one of the 2 out, I definitely recommend that you check his out. Link is in the description below to his channel. And if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to him as well. And obviously, subscribe to my channel down below as well if you enjoyed the conversation, and to keep up to date with Area 51, the Helix Project. The Kickstarter launches September 1st. Comic Boom, anything you want to say to the good people at home?
Well, yeah, check out Dark Knight's site and his review of 3 Jokers. It's excellent, and as deeply analytical with that, deeply analytical as he always is on that, and it's excellent. And yeah, I'll be supporting your comic book, the Helix Project, and I certainly encourage everybody to check it out on September 1st. I know I'm certainly looking forward to it. So
much appreciated. Yeah, thank you, man, for the kind words, and very much. You know, I hope everybody gives the Helix Project a chance. And you know, I'm sorry we have to kind of end the stream on such somber news, but boy, did that really take the wind out of me to read that report. So my thoughts and my well wishes go to Chadwick Boseman's family and friends. And man, 2020 is really racking them up. It's with that being said, I guess ending it on a positive note, I think it's very clear that Chadwick Boseman has in many ways defined a generation of young fans. He's provided a platform for those who do not look or that are that aren't necessarily represented in the way that they should be. He's given them a hero to look up to. I think there are a lot of young men and women who see Black Panther as their defining hero, and they see Chadwick Boseman's face and they hear his voice every time they think of this tremendous force for good that ultimately represents them in so many ways that no other character has up until this point. So with that being said, rest in power, Chadwick Boseman. This has been another episode of Let's Talk Comics. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will catch you later.